The Indiana Fever just told 1 million paying fans to get out, and nobody in power said a single word about it. What you're about to hear isn't a rumor, it isn't speculation, and it isn't being blown out of proportion. There is documented proof, in numbers, in receipts, in empty seats, that one statement from one coach just cracked the foundation of everything the WNBA spent the last 2 years building. And the most dangerous part of this story isn't what was said, it's what happened after. Because the silence that followed, that silence is the story. Stay with me, because by the end of this, you'll understand exactly why the next 72 hours could determine whether women's basketball ever gets this moment back. Before we go any further, if you're new here and you want the sports stories that the mainstream media is too afraid to touch, hit that subscribe button right now. We cover what others won't. Now let's get into it. The number that proved the fans were never bluffing. Let's start with a number, because this entire story lives and dies on data. 980,000. That is how many viewers disappeared from a single WNBA broadcast in one coordinated moment. Not a gradual ratings slide, not a seasonal dip explained away by scheduling conflicts or a competing broadcast. In one game, compared to the CBS broadcast that aired directly before it, 980,000 people made a conscious decision to turn the television off. And when people said the boycott wouldn't work, when analysts and commentators and league insiders said fans were just venting online and would never follow through, those people were proven completely and embarrassingly wrong. The audience that built the WNBA's financial revival didn't just threaten to leave, they left. And they left in numbers large enough to show up on a spreadsheet that network executives and advertising partners have to explain in quarterly meetings. Keep that number in mind, because everything that comes next is built on what that number means. What Stephanie White actually did. Imagine spending real money, jerseys, tickets, hotel rooms, road trip expenses, to support a team you genuinely fell in love with. You rearranged your schedule. You made it part of your life. You became, maybe for the first time ever, a fan of women's basketball. And then the head coach of that team looks directly at you and tells you that you were never really welcome. Not in a private conversation, not in a leaked message that was never meant to go public. Out loud, on the record, to the paying customers who spent the last year building the financial foundation that the entire league now stands on. That is exactly what happened with the Indiana Fever. And the fallout isn't approaching. It already arrived. It's already catastrophic. And unless someone with real authority steps in, what Caitlin Clark spent 2 years constructing for women's basketball may not survive what her own coaching staff just dismantled. This is not a culture war story. This is not a political debate about who's allowed to believe what. This is a professional sports franchise committing what may be the single most self-destructive act in WNBA history. And the most stunning detail, nobody in a position of power said anything. The silence from the Fever's front office is so loud it functions as its own statement. Every hour that passes without a response, without accountability, without a single decision being made, that silence is being read by millions of fans as institutional endorsement, as if the league is nodding along and agreeing. Yes, those fans should leave. The social media war zone that wasn't bots. The moment Stephanie White's statement went public, the Indiana Fever's social media became a battlefield. And here's what matters about exactly what that looked like, because it wasn't anonymous accounts. It wasn't coordinated trolling from people who'd never watched a game. It was fans posting jersey photos, ticket stubs from games they'd attended, hotel receipts from road trips taken specifically to Indianapolis to watch this team play live. Real people, real money, real investment in a sport they had discovered and loved. And the phrase, "Fire Stephanie White," didn't appear under some posts. It appeared under every single one. Not a vocal minority that could be easily dismissed. every post, every video, every announcement the organization tried to push out, including, and this is where it gets almost surreal, an announcement that should have been one of the best moments of the Fever's entire season. 3 All-Stars and a disaster. Caitlin Clark, Aaliyah Boston, and Kelsey Mitchell. 3 starters from the same roster named to the 2025 WNBA All-Star Game. That is a remarkable achievement. 3 players from one team earning All-Star recognition is the kind of milestone a franchise celebrates for years. That announcement should have been a victory lap, a moment of pure pride, a headline that traveled across every sports platform and reminded every casual observer that Indiana had quietly become one of the most talented rosters in the league. Instead, it landed directly in the center of a PR disaster the organization created entirely by itself. The All-Star news got buried. 3 of the best players in women's basketball had their moments swallowed by the avalanche of outrage that the coach manufactured. Think about how extraordinary that failure is. The most exciting player in the history of women's basketball, 2 of her teammates alongside her, All-Star recognition for all 3, and the story of the day is a coach telling half of Indiana they aren't welcome. And here's the part nobody is saying loudly enough. That's on the front office, too, because they chose silence. They let that moment get destroyed without saying a word. From sellouts to free giveaways, the business collapsed. 1 year ago, you could not get a ticket to an Indiana Fever game without paying a serious premium. The games were selling out. Restaurants surrounding Gainbridge Fieldhouse were reporting revenue spikes on game nights that the neighborhood hadn't seen in a decade. Hotels, merchandise shops, bars, the entire hospitality ecosystem around that arena got an economic jolt that nobody in Indianapolis had predicted or planned for. All of it because one player brought a new audience through the door. An audience that had never cared about women's basketball before. An audience that learned the names of every player on the roster, bought league pass subscriptions, traveled hundreds of miles for away games, and became genuine fans of a sport they'd previously ignored entirely. Now, the Fever are giving away free merchandise to try to boost ticket sales. Let that land for a moment. The same franchise that couldn't meet demand 12 months ago is now handing out free gear to get people through the turnstiles. That is not bad luck. That is not a difficult schedule or some unpredictable external circumstance. That is the direct, measurable consequence of alienating the exact audience that created the demand in the first place. And the financial stakes attached to that audience are almost impossible to overstate. The new collective bargaining agreement, the one that gave WNBA players the salary increases and improved travel and better benefits they've been fighting for across multiple seasons, that happened because of the revenue Caitlin Clark generated. The media rights deal with ESPN, NBC, and Amazon, worth billions over the next decade, exists because network executives looked at the ratings Clark delivered and finally decided women's basketball was worth a real investment. Every financial breakthrough this league has achieved in the last 18 months traces back directly to one player and the audience she brought with her. And the Indiana Fever's coaching staff just told that audience to leave. Who these fans actually are and why it matters. To understand why this situation is as volatile as it is, you have to understand the specific nature of the audience Caitlin Clark brought to this league. She's from the Midwest. She played at Iowa. She came from a college program that draws deeply from conservative, religious, traditionally Midwestern communities. The audience that followed her into professional basketball skews more conservative and more traditionally Christian than the league's existing fan base. And for a league that spent 20 years begging for mainstream attention, that should have been the best possible news. Bigger tent, new revenue streams, a demographic that hadn't been engaging with women's basketball suddenly buying tickets and merchandise and subscriptions. The correct response to that was obvious. Celebrate it, protect it, build on it. Instead, A message has been communicated, sometimes quietly, sometimes not so quietly, that if you came here because of Caitlin Clark, if you hold conservative values, if you have a religious background, if you voted a certain way, you are not who this league is for. Your money is welcome. Your presence and your identity are a problem. Stephanie White didn't invent that message. She just said it where everyone could hear her. And there's a term for what happens when an institution decides certain customers are acceptable targets for its contempt. It's called losing the room. And the Fever have lost the room in a way that will be very difficult to recover from. Because the people in those seats weren't casual viewers who might drift back after a few weeks. They were the converted. The people who went from zero interest in women's basketball to full-on fans who built their lives around game nights. Those are the hardest people to win back once you've told them they were never really wanted. The Alyssa Thomas pattern nobody is ignoring. One of the most revealing details in this entire situation isn't what Stephanie White said about the fans. It's what she's consistently chosen to say and not say about the on-court incidents involving her own star player. Alyssa Thomas, playing for the Connecticut Sun, was at the center of multiple documented on-court incidents involving Caitlin Clark. These weren't ambiguous plays subject to interpretation. They were flagged by analysts, discussed extensively, and generated serious questions about whether Clark was being targeted in ways the league wasn't adequately addressing. Stephanie White publicly defended Alyssa Thomas. She went on record supporting the opposing player involved in those incidents. And at no point, not once, did she defend Caitlin Clark with anything approaching the same energy. The head coach of the Indiana Fever has been more publicly protective of a player from a rival organization than she has been of the player who is single-handedly responsible for the franchise's entire financial revival. Clark supporters have been tracking this. Every time a rival player did something that went without adequate response, every time White stayed quiet when her own player needed public backing, every incident went into the mental ledger that fans keep when they're deciding whether an organization deserves their loyalty. And that ledger is now full. The statement nobody wants to see Caitlin Clark make. There is a genuine fear spreading through Clark's supporter base right now. A fear that she's going to be maneuvered into releasing a carefully worded statement defending Alyssa Thomas, or, at minimum, downplaying everything that's happened. The kind of statement that's clearly been constructed by a communications team trying to keep a player employable inside a league that has not made her feel protected. If that happens, if Caitlin Clark is positioned to publicly side against the fans who showed up for her, who organized on her behalf, who built her profile into something the entire sports world had to pay attention to, that's when the real and permanent damage happens. Not an organized boycott with hashtags, not a coordinated campaign, just millions of people, quietly, individually, deciding they're done, closing the app, canceling the subscription, moving on without making an announcement about it. That kind of disengagement doesn't make headlines, but it absolutely shows up in ratings. It shows up in revenue. And it doesn't come back. The most respected voice in women's sports says this is the defining image. Christine Brennan has covered women's sports longer than most people working in this industry have been alive. She has spent her career advocating for the WNBA during its hardest years. She has made the case over and over again that women's basketball deserved serious investment and serious attention. And even she looked at what the Indiana Fever just did and called it the defining image of the WNBA at this moment. Not 3 All-Stars from the same roster, not a historic media deal, not record ratings. The defining image is a coach giving the middle finger to the fans. That's the brand right now. That is what the Indiana Fever, and by extension the entire league, looks like to the casual sports fan scrolling through their feed today. And the league has chosen not to respond. The WNBA commissioner has not issued a statement, The league office has not fined anyone, suspended anyone, or even suggested in passing that telling your paying customers they aren't welcome might be a problem from a basic business standpoint. The Fever's official accounts are posting highlight reels, while the comment sections beneath those posts continue to burn. Every hour without a response is a decision, and that decision is being read loudly and clearly as confirmation that this is the league's actual position, the standard that exists everywhere else in sports. Herb Simon owns the Indiana Fever. He also owns the Indiana Pacers. Here is a very simple question. If a Pacers coach went on record telling half of Indiana that their values made them unwelcome as fans, what would happen? That coach would be relieved of their duties before the press conference ended. Statements would be drafted. Security would be involved. Because in professional sports, there is one rule that exists above all others. Regardless of politics, regardless of personal beliefs, regardless of any other factor. You do not tell ticket-buying customers that their religion or their background or their voting record makes them unwelcome. That is the line. It applies everywhere in professional sports. Apparently, everywhere except here. Christy Sides, the coach the Fever replaced when they brought in Stephanie White, had real problems. The offense stagnated. The rotations were questioned constantly. Fans wanted her gone. But she never walked up to the fan base and told them they didn't belong. She never made a paying customer feel like their values were being evaluated and found insufficient. She did her job imperfectly, but she didn't torch the goodwill that was accumulating around the franchise. And now, in one of the most remarkable reversals in recent memory, fans who spent a year loudly calling for her removal are saying, "Bring her back." When a fan base starts expressing nostalgia for a coach they wanted fired, you haven't just lost the room. You've created a reality where "didn't actively insult us" looks like competent, admirable leadership by comparison. The corporate sponsors are running the numbers right now. The sponsors who signed deals to be associated with the Indiana Fever didn't sign up for this. They signed up to be connected to Caitlin Clark, to growth, to an expanding audience and a brand finally moving in the right direction after 2 decades of struggle. They are now watching their names get pulled through every controversy on every platform where their target consumers spend time. And they are running a very quiet, very serious calculation about whether the association is still worth what they're paying for it. If those conversations turn into decisions, if sponsors start restructuring deals or declining renewals or simply not showing up at the table next cycle, the fallout from this week won't just be bad press. It will be compounding financial damage that the league won't be able to explain away with a highlight reel. The window is closing. The fans who are angry right now can still be reached. The sponsors who are uncomfortable can still be reassured. The narrative can still be redirected. But every hour the front office spends posting hype content instead of making a real decision, that window gets smaller. Because here is what is actually at stake beyond the Fever's season ticket numbers. The entire premise of the WNBA's billion-dollar media deal was built on one assumption: that the audience Caitlin Clark brought would keep watching, that they would be there next year and the year after that, that the ratings that convinced networks to invest at that level were real and sustainable. If those 980,000 people who already prove they'll leave decide to leave permanently, those projections collapse. The ratings that justified the investment evaporate. And a league that was finally, after 25 years, on the edge of genuine financial sustainability, goes right back to being a product that only exists because the NBA is willing to carry it. Stephanie White put all of that at risk. Not because of who she is, not because of what she believes in private, but because she walked into a professional environment and attacked the customer base. That is organizational malpractice. That is a leadership failure at every level of the franchise, from the coaching staff to the front office, to everyone who has chosen silence over accountability.
The Indiana Fever have a narrow window left to decide whether they are a real professional sports organization that understands how business works, or whether they are willing to let one coach's decision to mix personal politics with professional responsibility destroy everything that took 2 years and one extraordinary player to build. The fans aren't bluffing. They've already shown exactly what they're capable of. The only question now is whether anyone inside that organization is paying attention. Drop your answer in the comments right now. Are you still watching Fever games after this, or is this the line for you? And if you've made it this far, you already know this channel is the one that covers what nobody else will. So make sure you're subscribed before the next video drops, because trust me, this story isn't over.